शुरू करें? You guys are ready? Siley?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So welcome. This is the beginning of our React training, and this session is specifically just an introduction to React and the fundamentals of what is React, why do we use React, and what are the basic components, JSX, component state, and props. Just very basic overview we'll be going through. Okay? So let's to properly go through this training session, you should know certain fundamental things. So the prerequisites are: one is your JavaScript fundamentals. You need to know JavaScript. You need to know asynchronous JavaScript. It's not relevant to this session, but the future sessions. And you should be aware of how to interact with the DOM, the browser DOM, using JavaScript. So what's the agenda for today? What is React? Why use React? Component, state, and props. So at the end of this session, you should be able to write simple React components that use state and props. That's it. Okay. So let's start with what is React. And there's no better way than to start by actually making this simple counter app. So here you see the screenshot, right? We have the count 1. And if you click on add 1, it should basically just increment this count. Oh. Then I have to start again. Shit. अरे पहले बोल देगा. I'm going to start again, just briefly. Okay, so welcome. This is our JavaScript Josh training for React. And this is the first session. It's an introduction to React, the fundamentals, basically. To attend this session, you need to have a good understanding of JavaScript, asynchronous JavaScript, and how to interact with the DOM using JavaScript. So the agenda for today, we'll cover what React is, what is JSX, why should we use React, and we'll cover the basic components of React, so component, state, and props. And at the end of this session, we should be able to create some simple React components. So to begin, what is React, right? And there's no better way to figure this out than to actually write some code. So our goal is going to be to create this counter app, okay? And first we're going to do it using pure JavaScript, and then we're going to do it using React. So this is an H1 tag. This number should keep on changing as we click. So if I click add 1, obviously this should change to 2. That's going to be our goal. So let's get into it. So I've got the basic HTML layout ready. It has a div. There's an H1 tag, a button that increments, and a span inside the H1 that basically holds the count value. Now, if I want to implement the functionality of adding 1, how can I do that in index.js? So I'm asking actually.
So what is it?
How will we implement this functionality where we add 1 and this count should change?
So we need to add the function on button click.
Correct.
On clicking it.
Right. So first we need to get that button element, right? In JavaScript. So how do we do that?
From the ID.
Correct. So you want to tell me what I can write? Okay, cool. So document.get element by ID, increment, okay? And let's just say store it in a variable, button, right? Now button dot add event listener click, and on click we'll get the actually we don't need it. So on click, what do we need to do? Let's actually just test whether this works, right? Console log test, add one, and if I check the console, yeah, we're able to add one. So now I need to first get the value that is already there inside the count, and then I need to add one to that. So how can I do that? Out here, I'll go back to the HTML. Sally, feel free to jump in anytime.
We need to do the count plus one on that button.
But how will we get the count?
We need to
Same
so
get document by ID and use count.
Correct, right? So right now I'll just do one thing. I'll space out here. Yeah. So we'll get this span, okay, and then we'll get the inner text of this span element, right? And then we'll parse it into an integer, and then we'll add one to it, and then we'll tell the text, tell the span again that hey, your inner HTML should inner text should change to this. So let's do that. So let's say const count span equal to document.get element b count count equal to count span dot inner text, and we'll parse it. Parse int. And then count span dot inner text equal to count plus one, right? And all this will actually go inside, and we can remove this for efficiency. So let's try this. Yeah, it works. Cool. Now let's implement the same thing using React. Okay. So I come in out here. I have this. So all I've done is I've copied over the same HTML code. Okay. Now in React, what we have is something called a state variable. Okay. So let's say I'll say the count, comma set count equal to use state of 1. That should be our initial value. And in React, we have the special format of JSX. So we can directly inject our JavaScript inside of our HTML template. Okay. So yeah. The way to do it is with curly braces. Okay, so we can simply add curly braces, and we can add the variable name, right? In this case, it's count. And let's just see if this works. Okay. Yeah, so the count is showing up correctly. Now we need to add a handler for the button, right? So again, we don't need to do document.get element by ID or anything like that. Directly out here, we can declare on click a function where we set count to count plus 1, right? And then we add, and this works. So what do you from this small discussion or demonstration that we had, right? 2 or 3 things should become very clear. One is it is very easy to write in React compared to vanilla JavaScript, right? One is we don't now need to keep track of any of these kind of these IDs for all these elements, right? We just write the elements and that's it. And we already have the JavaScript on the same page in the same view. So it's much easier to understand what is happening, right? On the other hand, here we had to constantly go between the two files, right? We had to check in index.html, what is the ID? Okay, then we are changing it. We need to, get the inner text, parse it, etc., etc. Right? Which is seems at least much more involved. So this is the benefit of React, and this is why we should be using React and JSX in general. So React is said to be declarative as compared to vanilla JavaScript, which is imperative. What does this mean? So we just now saw, right? With vanilla JavaScript, we need to code each and every interaction. We need to tell, okay, which DOM element we need to target, what we need to change in that also, which event listener we need to add, things like that. Now imagine if this same count variable was used in multiple places on the app. So you would have to target each and every node with a query selector, and then for each node individually say, okay, set this to 2, set this to 2 with every change, right? In React, we simply need to code how the data changes, right? We just told that the count should go from 0 to 1, right? Or 1 to 2 or 2 to 3. And React internally takes care of it. Okay, how will I show this on the actual screen, right? React does all of this for us. We don't have to bother about it. It still does this thing where it targets different elements. It changes the inner text and things like that. But it does all of this for us automatically. We don't have to do it manually. Okay. So another benefit is we can write JavaScript and HTML on the same page. So as we saw, we didn't have to switch between two files to constantly just write a simple functionality. And third point is React is fast. That's what people say. But is it faster than vanilla JavaScript? So to understand this, to answer this question, we'll have to understand how React works internally. So React uses something called a virtual DOM. Okay. And every time the state, so for example, let's actually print it out. Okay. So this is something that you can do very easily. All I'm going to do is I'm going to console log this entire JSX. Okay. And you should be able to see it out here. Okay. So if you see, this is just a JavaScript object. Okay. If you're seeing whatever I've printed through the console log, which looks like HTML elements, is actually converted into this JavaScript object. Okay. This one is a div, right? And it has some props. It has the ID of root. So if we see our actual implementation also, actually maybe this should just this blue button side by side. Let's use this. Cool. So yeah, we see this has a prop ID of root. So this is the div with ID root. Now it has some children, 2 children in specific. So out here we can see it has one h1 and one button tag. So these are the 2 children in that object, right? One is type h1, one is type button. The button receives the props children, add 1. Children is just the text inside it, right? Yeah. And it also receives a prop called onClick, right? And the h1, it receives its props, which is the children, which is 2 things. One is count and one is 7. So internally, it'll just break it up into this count space and the JavaScript part, right? So now this is what the React converts our HTML code into. Okay, this is what is a virtual DOM. This is actually what is the virtual DOM. Now, so we have one version of the virtual DOM. Okay. Right now, the count here is 7. Now, if we add 1, it will create a new virtual DOM, with the count incremented by 1, which is 8, right? So if I scroll down and I actually open it, I should be able to see children H1, and this children should have count 8, right? So now what React does is it very quickly goes through this virtual DOM. Okay? So whatever this JavaScript object is, it compares every node and it goes through the children and it compares the children and the props of the children, right? Wherever it sees, okay, there is something different out here in the children or in the styles or in the CSS, whatever, right? Wherever it sees there's something different, it marks that node. Okay, so here, if on the image you can see these two orange nodes, for example, right? So it marks that node that this node has changed from the previous DOM, virtual DOM. And then what it does is after it computes this entire diff, then it updates the browser DOM. Okay, then it basically says, okay, document.get element by ID, get this particular element and then update this value, get this particular element and get this update this value. Okay. So creating and comparing. So why is this fast? First of all, so creating and comparing this virtual DOM trees is very cheap and fast. Like React can perform tens or even hundreds of thousands of them every second, right? It can create an entire tree, compare it tens and hundreds of thousands of times, right? But the most expensive part is painting any changes to the DOM. What does that mean? So when our text changes, okay, now this is 8. Suppose it changes to 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. You notice the width is increasing, right? If I go into 3 digits, the width will increase even further, right? Now, if the width increases, everything on the page needs to adjust around that width, right? This computation is done by the browser internally. Browser wo internally karta hai. We don't have to do it manually, but that is very, very expensive. So it is the most time consuming part of any DOM update. Okay, so that's why basically React, even though so this entire part of creating the virtual DOM and then comparing it, it's obviously extra, right? Compared to normal JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript will just say get this element and change its value. Now, on the other hand, React is saying that first create these 2 DOMs, compare them, and then make that change. So the reason why this is fast enough is because the most expensive part is again painting to the DOM, right? To calculate the entire layout again and things like that. Okay. So is React faster? No, but it is fast enough for most use cases. There are some use cases where you will find that maybe React is not fast enough. There could be multiple reasons for it. One is that you might have written your code badly, right? But another reason is if you are dealing with very, very elaborate charts or very elaborate tables and things like that. There are cases where JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript implementation will be slightly faster. Not very significantly, but slightly faster. And that will give you the performance improvement you need for a smooth user experience. So this is just something to keep in mind. Cool. All right. Now we'll go into component and props, right? So the basic structure of React is we use components. A component can be basically a function or a class. Okay, right now we're not going to go into the class-based version of React, so we're going to stick to functional components. So a function is just a component that returns some JSX. That's all you have to keep in mind. So components let you split the UI into independent, reusable pieces and think about each piece in isolation. Let's take an example for this, right? Let's say I want to create a let's say I want to create a counter actually like this, right? So const counter equal to a function, right? So it's a function that returns some JSX. And here we can just basically return the same thing. Okay. So first criteria is met. It returns some JSX, and we'll take this state variable also out here. And now what we can do is we can use this counter. So let's say I'll add a counter out here. Okay. Now notice how I'm writing it. I'm using the function name and I'm writing it as if it is an HTML tag, right? And I'll just close it. And this is absolutely valid. So this actually renders a counter. Now, let's say I want many of these counters, one below the other. Okay. So what I can do is I can put 3 or 4 counters. Now there's an issue, right? It's basically telling me adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. That means we can't have multiple elements returned. We need to have only one element returned from the component, which can have multiple children. So let's wrap these inside a div. Let's save this. And then we have multiple counters. And this is very, very simple to create, right? Another thing you can do is, let's say now I want each of these to have an initial count value. Okay. So I want each of them to have some initial count, which will be different for each one. I want to be able to pass this from the parent. How can I do that? So in typical HTML, if you think, how would you do that? You would probably pass it as an attribute to the element, right? We have a similar mechanism in React also. Okay, so let's say I say initial count equal to 4. Now notice that I had to write this inside curly braces, right? Because every time we're using a number, it is not a part of HTML. HTML only has strings and yeah, only strings actually. So initial count 4, say 5, 200, 3000. Okay. Now this obviously will not change anything, right? Because we've passed initial count here, but where are we actually using it, right? So whatever we pass out here gets sent to the component via something called props.
LND.
No, we're not LND.
I know you're not LND,
We're
which is
in
why I
middle.
said LND.
Oh, I don't know. We don't know. We're in the middle of training. It's
Is it?
recording.
I wanted this to.
Oh, sorry. We're recording. Please get out. Thank you.
Later on. Later on will come.
Yeah. Sorry for being rude, but
That's okay. I'll get back to you on this.
Okay. So let's just console log and check what we're getting as props. Yeah. So if we see, we're getting initial count in an object, inside an object, right? So props is basically an object that contains all the attributes that we pass to it. Okay. So let's say we pass something else also. Let's say we pass an onChange function. OnChange console.log test. So you see the first one changed to initial count and onChange. Both came inside the same object, which is your props object. Okay. Is this visible clearly on the screen and all that? Good.
What's printed 2 times?
Good question. That actually is because of, I think, strict mode. Okay, so this is something that we won't actually need to cover right now. So strict mode is basically a developer mode where React runs things 2 times. Every time it calculates a component or it computes a render, right? But if we just remove strict mode, I'm sure it will now just console log once. Let's try it out. Oh, sorry. Props. Cool. I will see it just once. So that was a part of strict mode. Good catch. Nice. So now we want this state variable to have the initial count, right? How can we do that?
You can pass that directly to what?
Correct. So we'll pass props directly.
This is object.
Correct. Props is the object.
So we need to pass that initial count.
Props.
Dot initial count.
Perfect. Props dot initial count. And this should be fine. Voila. It's working perfect. Right. There's also a different kind of props. Okay. So let's say I now let's create a custom, maybe a button.
Right, just one question. The initial count is our own variable or it's inbuilt in there? What?
No, anything you good question, right? So anything I pass out here is my own variable. I can pass initial count. I can pass Rahul equal to test, and that also goes as props. The React will not have any barrier, right? All it will do is it will take all of these attributes, seeming attributes, they're called props only, okay? And they will just merge it into an object. And those objects will be, those properties will be available in the props to me. Okay? So, yeah, good point. Now there will be, let's say we have a button component. Return button. And we want some specific style throughout the app, right? So typically we'll use class names, but right now I'll just use the style. So style, let's say border, none, padding, I don't know, 8 pixels, 16 pixels, and background. What's a good background color? Teal. Okay. And so what do we generally need to pass to a button? What attributes would you generally pass to a button?
Use like in HTML.
Generally, if you're using an HTML button, what all would you need to pass to it?
ID, style.
Name.
Name. Why would you need a name?
If we want to give different names to the button.
Correct. So basically we need some place to, we need to render the text somewhere, right?
Yes.
Inside the button. Each button might have different text. And second thing is, so let's say we'll take text
Function or
and on-click function, right? These would be two general things that we would need on all buttons. So on-click equal to on-click. And let's put text here. And let's actually replace our button with this capital component button. So we already have passed the on-click, and we'll just pass text equal to add 1. And yeah, this works. But this is inconvenient still, right? This is still inconvenient because I am generally used to passing add 1 as just directly writing it here, right? So how can I do that? So I can actually remove this text. I can pass add 1. And instead of text, there is one default prop. Okay, if you pass anything between the opening and closing tag of a custom component, that gets passed as a default prop called children. You'll remember this actually from what we saw inside the DOM node. right? When we printed it out, there were always props and children, right? So children comes in as a prop, and now that also works, right? So you have, we're using a button component with children. What I did here was basically just destructuring of the props, correct? I hope there's no doubts in that. Yeah, Saili, clear so far?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, cool. So this is what is about components and the props that it receives, right?
So I have one note.
Yeah.
So suppose this is a button component
Hmm.
and we have to use this button component commonly. मतलब एक file में मैंने एक component लिख दिया
Yeah,
and I have to use in different files. So
Yeah.
How I can use that?
okay, great. So very simple, you'll do it as you do any module in JavaScript, right? So let's just create a file. Commonly, what we would do is we create a directory for all our common components, right? In that, we'll create a file. Let's call it button.jsx. Okay. And from this app.js, I'll just copy this. Export this out. And in app.js, all I need to do is I now need to import. I just auto imported it, and voila, it works perfectly. Right. So this is how you would. Thanks for that question. Nice. Split up your code. Yeah. Cool. So this was about component and props. Now, next part is state. So state lets you declare a variable which, if we change, React will trigger a re-render. What does that mean? Let's again see it in code. Okay. So let's say this counter, okay, it's using this state variable with some use state hook. We haven't discussed this part yet. But let's say I just use a normal JavaScript variable. Let count equal to 1. Okay. And I'll say when we click count equal to count plus equals 1. Right. Now, let's do one thing. Let's add, and nothing changes. Okay. What is happening? What do you think is happening? Is this function getting triggered? Yes or no?
Actually, I didn't get what the previous one.
Oh, okay, cool. Let's go over it again. So first we were using this const count comma set count equal to use state. Okay. Now I just changed it. I said, let's just use a normal variable. No, why are we using all this? Let count equal to 1. And on click, we'll change the count to count plus 1. And if I click, okay, I am clicking. Sorry, I know it's not visible, but I'm clicking many, many times. And we see that the count has not changed. So what do you think? I mean, do you think the count value is changing? Like, is this function running or not? How can we check that?
For the running function, we can add the console log.
Perfect. Let's just add the console log, right? Console log. And we'll actually log the count value also out here, right? So let's just say count. And let's put it after it. Cool. Now, what do you expect to see? This should be interesting. Inside the browser. So initial count is 1. Now, when I click the first time, what should be printed out here? What is the value of count? That should
be 2, 1 plus 2.
Correct. Right. And we get that. Right. But the value out here is not changing. Why?
let's call again the count one. That's the date.
No, but we can see that the count has updated.
पेज रिफ्रेश नहीं हो रहा है शायद।
Page refresh मतलब मैं अगर browser refresh करूँ, if I refresh the browser window, will it work?
नहीं, फिर तो इनिशियली जो है वही हो जाएगा।
But why? The value of count is changing for sure. We've got the count variable is changing from 11 to 12 to 13. And it's not like this function is running different from the entire function. So that entire cycle that we actually saw, ठीक है? ये जो पूरा diffing cycle है ना, right? React will not run that every time we run any JavaScript code, right? React, we need to tell React, okay, hey, I have changed something, re-render the DOM. Okay, so I want you to React, we have to tell React that, hey, I want you to actually make a new virtual DOM and calculate the difference. So how do we do that? The only way to do that is through this. So this function, when we use this specific function set count, okay, that's when we tell React, hey, something has changed. Can you recompute the DOM? Okay, so let's comment this out. Okay, now set count plus, right? Now if you see, it's showing up out here also, and the console log is the same, right? But now one thing that we'll do is, let's say I just say, I don't call set count, I just say count plus equal to 1, and I make it red. Okay. In this case also, again, the count will change, but it's again not getting reflected, right? So the only way for us to tell React that, hey, something has changed on my DOM, I need you to create a new virtual DOM, calculate the difference, and then paint it to the browser window, is by using this function set count. And interestingly, very messy things can happen if you do something like this. So let's say we've done set count and we've done count plus 1 plus equal to 1. Okay. So now if I add 1, it shows 14. Okay. 15. Okay, fine. So no, nothing too funny happened. Okay. But cool. So we need to use the set count function. Okay. So basically, whenever we call this function useState is called a hook in React. Okay. The reason why it is called a hook is because it hooks into the render cycle. If we create a normal variable, we can't hook it into the render cycle. Okay. But
We need to use every time that we use the function.
correct. Every time we have a variable on the basis of which the view is changing. Okay. Let's say I have another variable which is only used in the onClick function. Okay. And it doesn't affect the rest of the view. Then it's fine. I can use a normal variable for that. But every time the view is changing based on a variable, I need to use the useState hook. Okay. So in React, there are only two ways of declaring state. One is from the useState hook or the useReducer hook. Okay. There are many libraries that have their own hooks. You call it. So there is the library called React Router, which will basically read whatever is there in the router and then kind of update the DOM every time. But those also will internally use this useState hook and the useReducer hook. There is Redux. So Redux is this a global store where anything changes in that store, it will affect our application. But again, internally it uses useState or useReducer. Nothing, you cannot trigger an update in React without one of these two hooks. Okay.
But what is different between use state and
Ha. That's what we'll come to much later. Use state is typically what we will use. Use reducer is for slightly more advanced use cases, and we'll cover that in our session on hooks. Right. And one more point that is good to cover right now is state must always be immutable. So let's do this. Okay. Let's turn our state into an object. Okay. So right now this state variable count actually has the object count with count, whatever the initial count is. Right. Now, if we want to set count, what will we do? Maybe we can do something like count dot count plus equals 1. Right, and sorry, out here I need to print count dot count. Yeah, so while setting the count, while updating the count, incrementing it, I will need to change the count variable inside, right? Count plus 1 to main nahi likh sakta because that's object plus 1. So count dot count plus equals 1. Right. Let's do this. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Let's say we do something like this. I'll take this into a different function only. Const handle okay. Now, can you tell me how we will actually update the state? So for convenience, maybe I'll rename this also. So, state. So we have state.count, which is
we need to pass that state.count to the handle also. That handle.
yeah. So that will already be there, right? Because it's in the outer scope of this function. You know? So it's in the outer scope, so it is available to us. We can directly access state.count.
So say state in bracket that state count plus 1.
Set state.count plus 1. Okay. Now think about it, right? If we set state to state.count plus 1, what is the value that will get returned out here? Let's say in this case, in the case of count 4, this will be 5, right? So now what state will do is, instead of having this object, right? Now it will have the value 5, right? Because we have set state to 5. So React will not care whether earlier we had an object, now we are converting into a number. Whatever we want, we can convert it into, right? But then that will, so then finally out here, it will read 5.count, which is obviously undefined. So yeah, nothing comes. So let me propose a solution. Let's say I say state.count plus equals 1. And then I set state with the state value. Okay. So state.count, I've incremented it by 1. And I have set state to this new state value, right? Would this work? Do you expect it to work? Yeah, cool. So let's try it with another one. Clearly, okay, it's not working. I'm clicking, but it's not showing up. Let's check. Let's console log. State.com. Actually, it changes after a while, but okay. Let's say so it's actually changing, but again, it's not showing up out here. Okay. So why does this happen? Can you tell me? So are objects in JavaScript, are they passed by value or passed by reference? So for example, if I do something like okay, let's say I do let a equal to object count 1 and b equal to a and b dot count equal to 20, right? If I run this functionality, what will get printed in a? Will a change if I do b dot count equal to 20? Siley? Siley, you there?
Yes, yes.
So if I do let a equal to count an object with count 1, I say b equal to a, and I said b dot count to 20. Will a change? Let's test it out. Okay. Now let's print b. Yes, b is count 20. A is also has A also has count 20. Why does this happen? Any idea? Okay. So when an object is created in JavaScript, okay, it gets stored in a particular memory location. Okay. Let's say that address is x 0x045. Okay. So all addresses in the computer are in hexadecimal. So we're just taking an example address. Okay, in this register, this value is stored. Okay. Now, when we said let b equal to a, okay, do we create? So we don't create a new variable or a new location in memory. So we don't create 0x046 where we again store count 1. Okay, what we do is b just has the address 0x045. Okay, kahan pe ye stored hai? Now when I do b dot count, it is going to the same address that a is also pointing to and b is also pointing to, right? And when I said b dot count equal to 20, so the location in this, the value in this address has changed. That's why a will also show you that change in value. Okay. So this is this is what we say. Objects are passed by reference. They are not passed by value. If the same thing you do with a string, it will be very different. So let's say let a equal to hello, let b equal to a, and b plus equal to word, right? So in this case, if we print out A, it's still hello. And if we print out B, it's hello world, right? So for strings, for numbers, they are copied by value. That means that if this hello string is stored in 0x045, when I say let B equal to A, it actually creates a new address 0x046, right? With the same string hello. And then when we add something to that, it gets changed in this address, but not out here. Okay? So objects, arrays, all of these are passed by reference. And strings, numbers are all passed by value. Okay. Cool. So what does this have to do with our discussion? Okay. Now, another thing we need to actually understand is, so if at this point, I print this, B is B equal to A. What will it print? True or false? Correct. It'll be true. Now, if I do this, what will it print? True? You're saying false. Why false?
Because it's storing different vectors.
Absolutely right. Right. So let A equal to count 1. That gets stored in 0x045. Okay. And let B equal to count 1. That gets stored in 0x046. Now, when we are doing a comparison like this, okay, imagine this object can be very, very huge also. Na? It can have 10,000 properties, right? Now, JavaScript, when we do this simple equality check, it will not go through each and every property and try to find out, okay, is it the same or is it not the same? It will only check, is the address the same? So whenever we are comparing objects or arrays, it will only check, is the address the same or is it different? Okay. So if the address is the same, then React, then JavaScript says, okay, these two are equal. But if the address is different, even though the contents are same, then JavaScript will say, no, these are not equal. Okay, cool. So far, so good. Now, what happens, okay, when we have this state? So initially, what React will do is it will create that entire component tree, right? And let's refresh this. It will create that virtual DOM, okay? And in that DOM, there will be one state variable, which is this, right? Count, which an object with count, okay? Now, when we do state.count plus equal to 1, the address is the same, correct? We're not changing the address of state. Now, if we come back, what happens? It tries to calculate a difference, right? But now it's trying to compare the address of state. Address of state here is also same, here is also same. Okay, these are equal. And then it moves forward. So this doesn't get marked as a different DOM now. Okay. So what we need to do is we need to create a new object. So a couple of ways to do this. One way is simple. We just create a new object, say count will be count state.count plus 1. Plus 1. Right? Now it works perfectly. So this is fine. But let's say we had another variable out there. Let's say call it count2, which is 0. Okay. And we never change count2. Okay. but we just print it state.count2 right next to it. Now, if I click on add, what do you think will happen?
Only in this the error.
Okay, why error?
Because we not pass the count to.
Correct. Good. What happened? Oh. Okay, because we haven't passed the count2 out here, but will it give an error? State.count2. What would that be?
That will be true.
No. If we have already updated it, and we have only passed an object with count, okay, so it gets set to an object with count 5. Okay, so state.count2, what will it be? So state has only one property now, count, right?
Undefined.
Undefined, absolutely. So if we do this, add 5, the 0 just disappears because out here we're getting undefined. Okay. Okay. So so in this case now, what should we do? We want the entire state. We don't want to lose the rest of the state, right? Imagine you had a form which had 10 fields and you're storing all the fields in one object. You don't want to lose out all the other fields every time one field is updated. How do you update this?
You have to pass that count to.
Okay, but every time writing count2 and then all those other 10 variables. Is there any easier way to do it? Think about how we create a copy of an object. All right. Cool. All we need to do is we need to use the spread operator. You are familiar with the spread operator? Yeah. Very simple. So you spread out everything that is there before it, and then whatever you need to update, you just update that. And this will work well. Yeah. Cool. So this is about state. So every time we set state, we need to make sure that if it is an object, if our state variable is an object, we need to create a new address for it. How you create it is your business, right? You can either pass the same object or you can just spread the object and change whatever value you need to, but you need a new object, right? And that is what will, and the same applies to arrays and arrays of objects everywhere. You will have to spread at each and every layer. We'll come to that in future sessions. But yeah, so this is state in React. Cool. I think that's all for today. Any questions you all have about what we've discussed so far? Let's do a quick review maybe. Okay. So we started by creating this counter app first in JavaScript and then in React, right? In JavaScript, we had to get the document.get element by ID and things like that, and then manually update each one. In React, we just had to use the set state function, right? That set state function changes the data, and however that data changes the view, that is what React controls. We don't have to look into the details of that. So that is why React is called declarative as compared to vanilla JS, which is imperative, right? Another advantage, we write JavaScript and HTML on the same page, so it's more maintainable, it's easier to code. And we also saw the entire diffing cycle, right? How it creates a virtual DOM. We actually printed it to the console and saw. And how it calculates the differences between two virtual DOM trees and then applies it to the browser. This is what makes React very fast because the most expensive part is painting to the browser DOM. Okay, this one is very cheap. We can do hundreds of thousands of these computations in a second, but this one requires recomputing the layout of all the elements on the page, and that's why it is more expensive. We looked into component and props. So generally, we are using functional components, right? Which is just any function that returns JSX, right? The HTML format that we saw, HTML plus JavaScript format that we saw. The naming convention for all components is Pascal case. Pascal case is basically camel case, but the first letter has to be capital. Okay, so all components should always be named with a first letter capital. Props, we can pass attributes in like HTML. We can pass them as props into React, and React basically makes an object out of them and makes it available to us inside here, right? Then we can access different values, and we can use destructuring however we require to just write it more conveniently. And there is a special kind of prop, which is the children prop, which when we have a starting component tag and an ending component tag, anything we put in between gets passed as children, right? And then we have state. So state lets you declare a variable, which if we change, React should trigger a re-render, right? We've seen what that means. So we can't use regular variables. Otherwise, React will not know when should I actually create a new virtual DOM, right? The only way for us to tell it is using that set state function or using the dispatch function that comes from use reducer. We won't get into that right now. It must be immutable, which means every time you change the state, you must, if it is an object on an array, you must return a new reference or a new address in memory. Otherwise, React will think nothing has changed because the address is same. Okay, it can't do a full deep comparison every time. That would make it pretty slow. Cool. So that was that. Any questions you'll have so far? Saili, any questions? All good? See, cool. All right. So that's it for this session. Thank you, guys. And